You know, many of you know I had this experience just about this time last week. I was sitting beside my father, who had just died about an hour and a half ago. He died, I think, about 4:30, 5 o'clock, something like that. And it was very interesting. It's the first time, you know, I'm 60 years old. It's the first time I was with somebody when they died. I expect that maybe some of you have had that experience. Many of you have not had that experience. And in this particular case, you know, if it's your father or a child or a loved one or a family member, it's especially sort of gives rise to a great question. So we were sitting. He stopped eating about 2 weeks before he died. And he stopped drinking any fluids 8 days before he died. They had absolutely no fluid, no food for 8 days, and no food for almost 2 weeks. And he was 95 years old, and he just kind of, I mean, some of us maybe get to go quickly. His style was to go very slowly. So he just lay in bed, eyes sort of half open, and he had this breath. It's kind of interesting because he had a stroke 2 years ago, and so he couldn't move the right side of his body. So he was paralyzed for 2 years, and he couldn't eat any solid food, so his quality of life was not so good. You know, he just lay in bed all day long. And he gave up talking about 8-10 months ago. I would go in and visit him. I could see he recognized me with his eyes. Never said anything to anyone. Just stopped. I don't know if it was dementia or just he didn't want to talk or he had no energy to speak. Don't know. He just stopped. So then last week, he just lay in bed. And his breath was a little bit like, maybe I can imitate it. It was like, okay. 24 hours a day for roughly 7 days. Okay? You could look in his mouth, and because he's had no fluid, his tongue and the inside of his mouth was like leather. It was dry as a bone. No moisture at all. So we would take a little Q-tip every once in a while and dip it in water and wipe it across his lips, or maybe touch a little bit on the inside of his tongue and try to give him some lubrication. Then after, over a week of that, it became apparent that the breath was a little more like this. That was maybe 3 or 4 days like that. You know, and the last day, the last few hours we were sitting with him, the breath would go, and then long pause. And then as we were all standing around the bed, my sister and my niece and myself, he's like, and he never inhaled again. He just never came back in. It's very interesting. I was like, is he alive? Did he die? What happened? You know? We all get to go that path in one form or another. We all get the illusion that, in fact, somehow we separate from the universe. We separate. And we have some ability to manipulate it a little bit. But in the end, we all return to the universe. You can hold the illusion of separateness, but you can never be separate. And if you're with somebody that dies, that's very apparent in a way. At least it was for me. It's very apparent that he was there in his body, and then there was an empty shell. Why? Don't know. If we make a story about it, in some ways, we create just that, a story, an illusion. If we don't make a story about it, then it's just kind of this wondrous event. What happened? Don't know. One reason Zen practice is so appealing to me is because it doesn't make a lot of stories. It makes some, but it doesn't make a lot, and it tends to pull the rug out from underneath them. So rather than having a story about going to heaven or getting some transitional or new body or it's just like, oh, don't know. My experience was that in that moment, life was very alive for me. In Zen, sometimes they talk about walking on the sword's edge. Or I'm sure in this culture you hear this, you're on the razor's edge. That means is there's a sharpness and an awakeness to the moment. It's not really about trying to understand one thing that's opposing another. It's just the sharpness of wakefulness. And in our way, our meditation practice, it's softer, but it has the same emphasis on that kind of clarity. It's can we be awake and attentive for our life? And even if it's just a few more moments a day that we're awake, there's nothing more valuable. Nothing more valuable than experiencing your life as it is. And the only place you can experience it is in the moment that it is. Whether it's 20 people sitting in the Dharma room, or whether it's recognizing the floor is brown, or whether it's just hearing this voice as it passes into your ear, vibrates those bones, gets transmitted into an electrical charge, goes up into your brain, and somehow turns into something cognitive. Yep. It's crazy. And then one day, it just stops.